After studying this module, you would be able to understand the assumption of monopolistic competition, know about the importance of product differentiation and the demand curve faced by a monopolistically competitive firm, understand the notion of industry and product group, and finally know about the short run and long run equilibrium of a firm under monopolistic competition. Perfect competition and monopoly are extreme cases that do not involve active competition at all. In the former, firms have no influence over the market price, while in the latter there is only one producer. Most of the real firms operate under intermediate market structures. To begin with, they are not monopolies because their industries contain several firms which often compete with each other actively. On the other hand, these firms do not operate in perfectly competitive markets because the number of competing firms is often too small, and even when the number is large, the firms are not price takers. In the real world, most of the firms operate in intermediate market forms where they do have some monopoly power, some market power, but they also have to face some kind of competition. Therefore, there is a need to study firm behavior in such intermediate market structures. They are called imperfectly competitive markets. The word competitive emphasizes that we are not dealing with monopoly, and the word imperfect emphasizes that we are not dealing with perfect competition. In this module, we shall be focusing on one of the prominently prevailing intermediate market structure that is known as monopolistic competition. This form of market is close to perfect competition with one major difference, and that is that firms do not sell a homogeneous product. Now let us understand the assumptions of monopolistic competition. One of the simple models of imperfect competition is known as monopolistic competition. Tractability of this model is achieved by limiting the form of interdependence between producers. Monopolistic competition refers to a market in which there are many firms and sell a single differentiated product, not homogeneous product, to many buyers. Since each firm is somewhat different from those of its competitors, each firm faces a negatively sloped demand curve for its product. As we had seen, in the case of a perfectly competitive firm, the demand curve is perfectly horizontal. The theory is based on four assumptions. The first assumption is that each firm produces one very specific variety of a generic product. Each firm thus faces a demand curve that is negatively sloped, and yet it is somewhat elastic because there may be other substitutes which are sold by other firms. Within the industry, there are a number of firms, each one ignores the possible outcomes of its competing firms when it decides about its own price and output decisions. Each firm's decision making is based on its own demand and cost conditions and does not take into account the potential reactions by other firms. There is free entry and exit. If firms are earning profits, then new firms have the incentive to enter. When they do so, the demand must be shared amongst more and more firms within industry. There is symmetry. When a new firm enters selling a new differentiated version of a generic product, it takes the customers equally from all existing firms. Now, these are some of the basic assumptions. Product differentiation. What is product differentiation and how does it affect the demand curve? Product differentiation is intended to distinguish the product of one producer from that of another producer in industry. The product is not homogeneous as it used to be under perfect competition. The products have some basic features which may be common, yet each consumer is persuaded via advertising or other selling activities, promotional activities, that in fact the products are different. This is a perception which is driven into the minds of the consumers. Product differentiation exists when differences in the factor inputs or the locations of the firm which determine the convenience with which the product is accessible to the consumer, or the services offered by the producer, or simply some fancied differentiation which may happen due to advertising or differences in packing, differences in design, or simply by a brand name. Whatever the case be, the aim of product differentiation is to make the product unique in the minds of the consumer. Differentiated products are closely related to each other and therefore they are included within what is called the product group. The products should be close substitutes with high price and cross elasticities. The effect of differentiated products is that producers have some discretion in the determination of price. Here the producer is a price taker to a great extent, but still has some degree of monopoly power. However, he faces a keen competition from the close substitutes offered by other firms. Hence, the discretion over the price is limited. Product differentiation creates brand loyalty of the consumer, and this is responsible for a negatively sloping demand curve. Product differentiation finally provides the rationale for selling price. Perfectly competitive firms face perfectly elastic demand curves for their product because all firms in industry produce exactly the same product. In monopolistic competition, the firm faces a downward sloping demand curve. This type of a demand curve is due to the notion that the firm can change its price without losing all of its business, because buyers do not see any perfect substitute which exists for this. Fewer the substitutes, the more the product differentiation elastic the demand curve would be. So therefore, we have a typical case where the perfectly competitive demand curve is horizontal and the demand curve under monopolistic competition is downward sloping. The concept of industry group and product group. Product differentiation creates difficulties in analytical treatment of the industry. Heterogeneous products cannot be added into one single market form, and market demand and market supply schedules are not exactly the same as in the case of homogeneous products. Therefore, the concept of industry needs to be redefined. Chamberlain used the concept of product group, which includes products which are closely related. The products should be close technologically and are economically substitutes. Technological substitutes are products which are technically cover the same want. For example, all motor cars are technologically substitutes in the sense that they provide transport. Economic substitutes are products which cover the same want and have similar price. For example, you could consider different cars which are having the same range of price. An operational definition of product group is that the demand for each single product is highly elastic and that it shifts appreciably when the price of other products in the group change. In other words, product forming the group or industry should have a high price and cross elasticity. Summation of the individual demand curves and cost curves to form the industry demand and supply requires the use of common denominators. Even so, with the product differentiation, there is no such unique price except under Chamberlain's heroic assumption. As per Chamberlain, the heroic assumption is that the cost and demand functions commonly through the group. This requires that the consumer preferences be evenly distributed among sellers and that the differences between the products be such that they do not give rise to differences in cost. Simultaneously, as product differentiation allows each firm to charge a different price, there will be no unique price but an equilibrium cluster of prices reflecting the preferences of consumers for the product of various firms in the group. When the market demand shifts or cost conditions change in a way all firms, then the entire cluster of prices would rise or would fall alternately. The equilibrium of the firm under monopolistic competition. It refers to the market with a fairly large number of firms which sell differentiated products. A single firm in a product group or industry hardly has any impact on the market price. However, if it reduces the price, it can expect a considerable increase in the. Each firm is capable of drawing consumers from other firms by conjuring belief of a certain difference or a real difference with the help of a range of non-price competition such as advertisement and sales promotion. Under these circumstances, the firm can raise the price and not yet lose on the customer demand. This is because of the fact that the product is differentiated from the competing firms and there are also non-price factors. The demand curve or the AR curve of the monopolistic firm is therefore highly elastic and yet is downward sloping. The marginal revenue curve is also slopes downwards and lies below the demand curve. There is a fixed relationship between AR and MR. Now let us consider short run equilibrium under monopolistic competition. During the short run, the number of firms in the group remains constant. The size of the plant of each firm remains constant. The firm, whether operating under perfect competition or monopoly, wants to maximize its profit. In order to achieve this objective, it has to go on producing the commodity as long as the marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. When marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, equilibrium is established. If a firm produces more or less than the output at which marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, then it cannot maximize its profit. In the short run, a monopolistically competitive firm may be realizing abnormal profits or may be suffering losses. If it earns profits, no new firm can enter in the short run. In case it is suffering losses but covering its full variable cost, then the firm will continue to operate so that losses are minimized. If the full variable cost is not met, then the firm will close down in the short run itself. The short run equilibrium with profits and short run equilibrium with losses of a monopolistic firm are explained with the help of two separate diagrams. First of all, let us consider the case where we have MC, which is marginal cost, ATC, average total cost, both are U-shaped. As you could see, the demand curve is downward sloping, the marginal revenue curve is below it. If we consider marginal cost being equal to marginal revenue, then the price would be OP or Q0A, which are at the same height. So, therefore, the height of the demand curve is nothing but AR. And at this point, if you notice, the average total cost is Q0B, and average total cost lies below the average revenue curve or the demand curve. So, A to B, this distance shows the supernormal profits. Therefore, if we multiply AB into OQ0, then this rectangle which shows the supernormal profit tells us that under such conditions supernormal profits are possible. Now we consider losses. In the case of the next diagram, the other things being the same, demand curve being downward sloping, marginal revenue curve being downward sloping, and the marginal cost curve intersecting the marginal revenue curve gives rise to a price level which is AQ1 or is equal to P1. Now, at this price, what happens is that the cost curve is above the. Now, we will consider the case of a loss making firm. In this diagram, please notice that the average total cost curve lies above the demand curve. Under such conditions, the marginal cost intersects the marginal revenue curve and the price is determined at a level which is below A. It is the point at which is exactly lying above the point where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. However, the price is less than AQ1. If we consider the price to be P1, then the average revenue is lower than the average cost. The average cost is AQ1 and the price, which is average revenue, is OP1. The difference between the two tells you that average cost is higher than average revenue and this gives rise to a loss. Now, this difference has to be multiplied by OQ1 and it gives you the rectangle which indicates a loss. So, what we see over here is that in the short run both profit as well as loss is possible depending upon the level of the cost curves. Now, let us consider long run equilibrium in the case of a monopolistic firm. In the long run, the firms are able to alter the scale of the plant. Accordingly, the changed conditions of demand for product in the market leads to a condition where firms could continue to have supernormal profits or could continue to have losses. It could either lead to firms leaving the industry or new firms entering the industry. If firms reap supernormal profits, then in the short run other new firms would enter the product group or the industry. The tendency of new firms to enter the industry continues till the abnormal profits or supernormal profits are competed away and the firm makes economic profit, which is actually a condition where average cost is equal to average revenue. On the other hand, firms which realize losses in the short run will leave the industry, and when they exit the industry, then firms which would earlier be having zero economic profits are able to restore their operations. In the long run, therefore, there are no barriers to entry, new firms could come and go. The incoming firms try to differentiate their products. The old firms operating in the industry with used machinery try to match up with new entrants by improved variety of products in their group. They incur expenditure on advertisement and sales promotion. They employ better quality staff for making technical improvements in the products. All firms incur additional expenditure on account of quality improvements. The cost curves of such firms move up. Due to the entry of new firms in the industry, higher cost of production and the output of each competing firm is reduced. Monopolistic competition leads to waste in the economic resources of the country. Long run equilibrium of monopolistic firm is now explained with the help of a diagram. In this diagram, the long run marginal cost curve LMC cuts the marginal revenue curve at point M. The demand curve is tangential to ATC curve at point T. The equilibrium firm produces OK output and sells it at OE price. Since the price equals LAC at point T, no firm is making positive profits. There is no incentive for the new firms to enter industry nor for the existing firms to leave it. All firms, according to the figure, make normal profits. So, the industry in the long run equilibrium exists in such a condition as we could see from the diagram. An unlikely perfectly competitive firm may find itself in such a situation, but under monopolistic competition the firm ends up either choosing the level of output that is below the minimum efficient scale. When the firm produces below the minimum efficient scale, then the firm produces is underutilized and therefore resources are underutilized. This situation is known as excess capacity. There is excess capacity which can actually be used for increasing the output. The excess capacity is a major social cost and it is one of the harmful effects of monopolistic competition. The price taker assumption has certain advantages because the competitive producer can produce as much as the market allows. So, one of the advantages of an atomistic producer is it does not have to be bothered about product differentiation and so on. Under monopolistic competition, when entry takes place, the competition intensifies and producers have to devise their own methods to deal with competition. Some of them use advertising while others use product differentiation, sales promotion techniques and so on. The average cost curve therefore increases at the level of the average cost curve increases on the one hand, and on the other hand the demand curve becomes more elastic. When the demand curve becomes more elastic, then the producer cannot charge a higher price. So, on the one hand there is an increase on the cost, on the other hand the producers who succeed in product differentiation, branding and sales promotion are benefited because all these additional costs are effective in generating more demand. Therefore, the demand curve expands in their case. As their demand curve expands, there is greater possibility of production and profit increases, but at the same time there are inefficient producers who cannot cope with the increase in cost and the competition and increasing advertisement cost and so on. So, in the long run there is a flux. Those who have burned their fingers leave the industry, those who are ambitious enter the industry. So, under monopolistic competition the conditions in the long run are such that the market is never in a state of stable equilibrium. This you can observe in the diagram that as we proceed, the demand keeps shifting from D1 to D2, the supply keeps shifting from S1 to S2 to S3 and so on, and this leads to an expansion of the industry and the price level keeps falling such that we reach a minimum level. At this minimum level, it is possible in an industry for some firms to operate in a monopolistic market which are still having supernormal profits, and some firms may be incurring losses. And in the long run, this whole situation could still continue, and this leads to a flux where all the firms keep entering and exiting from the industry, and this tendency continues whereby abnormal profits may or may not be wiped out. In the long run, unlike perfect competition, in monopolistic competition, there is no stable equilibrium due to this influx and outflux. Initially, there are relatively few producers in the market, and therefore the supply is less. Increasingly, the supply increases, the demand also increases, and therefore we have this condition where you have a constant flux in the market. Now, let us summarize what we have studied. Imperfect competition refers to those market structures that fall between perfect competition and pure monopoly. Markets that have some features of competition and some features of monopoly are known as imperfect competition. Under imperfect competition, we have one market form which is known as monopolistic competition. Since each firm has got a differentiated product from its competitors, therefore it faces a negatively sloped demand curve. Differentiated products are created sometimes due to a perception in the consumer's thinking and attitude, and sometimes due to advertising, promotion and selling cost. There is something known as a product group and as a industry. Then monopolistic firms maximize profits as any other firm would do by equating marginal cost and marginal revenue. In the short run, there could be supernormal profits or there could be losses. But in the long run, we have a very peculiar situation. There is a constant flux of firms entering and leaving the market, and this results in a situation where there could be simultaneously firms which have supernormal profits and there could still be firms having losses. And in this way, the long run condition is different from perfect competition. Furthermore, one of the social losses due to monopolistic competition is excess capacity, that the entire productive capacity is not utilized, and this is a social loss.